The Worldwide Conservatorium of Music welcomes you to Lives of the Great Composers. Today, Handel, presented by Professor Percy B Scholes.
Hello. George Frederick Handel was born in 1685 in the little town of Halle in Saxon Germany, which is very fortunate, since at that time that's where his mother was. Unlike most famous composers, his family was not musical. His father was a prominent barber and surgeon, which I suppose means that he could have done a vasectomy and a Brazilian at the same time. But despite his father's disapproval, young George was secretly given a small clavichord, which he would silently practice in his bed at night. This led to numerous veiled lectures from his father regarding the rhythmic bumping coming from his room, which caused the young Handel much confusion at the time, and then dysfunction for the rest of his life. He taught himself to compose by copying others' works, and was finally allowed to learn the organ. However, Handel's other abiding interest was money, so he decided to obey his father and study law. This didn't last, and before long he was in the Hamburg Opera House Orchestra, where for the first and last time he played second fiddle. This was not a waste of time, for Italian operas were the latest rage, and seeing how successful they were, he decided he could get in on the racket. He set off to Rome. Unfortunately, by the time he arrived, the Pope had banned all opera, so, being a good Lutheran boy, he wrote several to great reviews. Finding too many Italian composers in Italy, he went back to Germany in 1710 and got the gig as Kapellmeister to the Elector of Hanover. But there were also a lot of German composers, so he began asking around to find if there was a country where he wouldn't have any competition. England. It had had a composer once, but he was long gone. There was a vacuum, and Handel sniffed an opportunity. He made some excuse and asked for time to go to London. He was always a fast worker, and he became a huge hit after spending a fruitful half-hour cobbling together bits of his earlier works and calling the resulting opera Rinaldo. But this was nothing compared to his unleashing on the English public of one of the great Italian masterpieces, Macaroni Cheese. Back in Germany, his boss was getting impatient. So after 7 months, Handel was back in Hanover and having to wangle another sabbatical by promising to return in a reasonable time. Obviously, Handel didn't consider 50 years unreasonable. He spent the first couple in London composing and producing his operas. In fact, he was so profitably engaged, he forgot to send any postcards to his old boss, something he later regretted when Queen Anne died, and who should move to England as his new boss, George I. Not surprisingly, upon arrival George tried to kill him. The first time, to drown him by dragging him down the Thames. This resulted in the water music. And the third by trying to blow him up, which resulted in... Yes, that's right. The result of the second, however, remains with us. George arranged for Handel to premiere his new work, The Messiah, in Dublin, trusting that the Irish Catholic extremists would do their duty. But when he arrived back unscathed, George decided to take matters into his own hands. He smuggled a pistol into the London premiere of The Messiah, and at a noisy moment at the end of the Hallelujah chorus he, preparing to take aim, stood. The rest is history. Handel very wisely tried to keep himself away from the court as much as possible. Not a hard thing to do, as he was making serious money with his operas. However, we must remember that opera in those days was not as we know it now. It was an enjoyable outing. But he had his hands full between the sopranos, the prima donnas, and the castrati, the prima donnas. They would drop their favourite arias into any show, higgledy-piggledy, a habit which continued until Gluck reformed the opera world. Gluck has a lot to answer for. Today's entrepreneurs could take a leaf out of Handel's book. He imported the famous and expensive soprano Cuzzini from Italy first, then her rival Faustina, and set them up as mortal enemies. In one performance in 1772, they appeared together, and different cliques booed and hissed their unfavourite. Then a fight broke out off stage, and then the sopranos went at it on stage. Who wouldn't pay to see that? But alas, the opera was becoming prohibitively expensive to produce and was cutting into his profits. So Handel had a brainwave. His new operas would have no moves, no sets, and no costumes, and would not be called cheap opera, but oratorios. He was back to making a buck. The most famous of these oratorios, of course, is the aforementioned Messiah. My dear friend Dr. Dean conducts the annual university performance and has done for many years, which is rather unfortunate in that he loathes the piece. However, for the university it is a major fundraiser, and each year Dr. Dean breaks records. Last year he got it down to 15 minutes. Towards the end of Handel's life his eyesight was fading, so, also needing a haircut, he called upon the famous Dr. Taylor, famous for blinding both J.S. Bach and historian Edward Gibbon. So Handel had himself done too. He finally died on Good Friday in 1759, and his contemporaries, noting that he hadn't risen again, buried him in Poets' Corner. In closing, I think I should mention Handel's modern legacy. Over the last few decades there has been a huge increase in performances of his works, which has led to a vast increase in the number of countertenors for the general public to poke fun at. I look forward to our next little chinwag. Till then...
This week's featured books are Double Entente for Organists and The C Major Scale, A Racist Conspiracy, not available at good bookstores. Along with this week's featured CD, Complete Chopin, performed by Dr. Robert Dean on accordion. You can find all these and more at the Worldwide Conservatorium of Music website. Just remember what all our students say about us, What a Con. That's whatacon.com. This program produced by Gregory Gish.